Welcome to the Atomic Level, the show where we decode the matters of wealth, one insightful conversation at a time, so that you can grow and protect your net worth and your net happiness. I'm Chris Snook. Today we are going live. So if you're listening to this on recording, the date of this recording was April 16th, 12 noon Eastern, and I will be joined shortly by Charlie Garcia, who is currently the number one across all finance in Substack. And you're going to find out why here in just a couple seconds. And we're going to spend the next 2 hours with Charlie picking his brain. And if you've been a fan of the podcast or the show before, you kind of know we have a slow burn, but it gets hot in a hurry when it comes to our narrative arc. So we're going to talk about the personal, the philosophical, the strategic, the practical and tactical. And so when we get into Charlie's mind, you're going to not only understand what shaped the worldview, what shaped his approach, what's feeding it today, but also what his thoughts are and what his operating system looks like. And then what the tactical and practical applications to you, the average or retail or high net worth investor, because we have people all over the map, or the advisor to those families. So again, get something to write with. If you're a note taker, get something to drink. If you need something to sip, use the restroom early because you're going to want to not miss a second of this. And Charlie was just in the thing, and Substack is kicked him out for a second. So let me resend him the thing. Bear with us here, and I'm going to get him back in. All right. Messaging him right now. This is how you know this is not AI, by the way, because this crap doesn't happen when it's perfect. There he is.
Hey.
I did the whole intro. So the good news is you don't have to hear me do the intro, Charlie. It was a good one too, I think. But the funny thing was, I was like, I have no idea what just happened, but Substack, subjects kicked him out. I was doing the Johnny Carson.
Substack, the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, the U.S. government probably wanted me out.
Yeah, somebody kicked you out. I mean, I think they know what we're about to talk about is going to be pretty groundbreaking. And so for those who are not familiar with Charlie, again, you really I'm going to do the plug because I'm unsolicited, right? If you're not following this guy, if you're not subscribed to this guy, in the last 24 hours, maybe 36, but I'm going to exaggerate just a hair. I think 1,500 people from our conversation in the green room have subscribed to Charlie's Substack. Now, there's a reason why number one is number one. We'll see how long you can hold on to it, but that clip is going to be pretty tough because if you've been writing on Substack, listening on Substack, or following anybody on Substack, this is the power law in action and well-deserved. And so if you're not reading his stuff, we're going to get into it. But again, we're not going to regurgitate what he's done on his YouTube, what he's done on his thing, because that's where you need to go to get it. What we're going to talk about is, again, the man, the philosophy, and what shaped it, right? The operating system, how he thinks, why he thinks that way, where he gets his data from. And then also the strategic, the what it means to you, right? What his framework is, how he's looking at the markets, the world, investing, protecting money, preserving capital, passing it down. And then very tactical, meaning what Charlie recommends you do, but practical. How do you do it? Whether you're a $2 million family, whether you're a $30 million family, or whether you're one of his $600 million average worth families in R360, which is a company we'll get to at some point in this. So sit back, relax. If you're a Substacker, learn from this man because we're going to go all over the map unscripted. It's awesome to have you, my friend, and I am super excited to spend the next 2 hours together. So let's get into it. Where did you come from and what shaped the worldview that you kind of come from? You have a phenomenal story, but just kind of summarize that for us, personalize that for us a little bit.
Well, I think the big thing is I've had an opportunity to work for 6 presidents of the United States of both parties. I'm a combat veteran. I also lived overseas for 20 years. So I grew up in the Republic of Panama, even though I was born in Washington, D.C. My father was a heart surgeon. I was named Charles after Charles Hufnagel, who invented the heart valve in 1952, and my father was with them in D.C. at Georgetown. He met my mother there, who was a nurse. My mother was born in Mississippi, but got kicked out of Mississippi. Her father did. My grandfather, who was a World War II combat doctor, landed at Normandy, and he was the head surgeon for American troops in the French resistance in France. He brought the blood bank because he worked with it during the war to Florida, only blood bank for 30 years, but he also worked with a lot of African American soldiers. So he tried to integrate a hospital in Mississippi. He
Hmm.
got a call in 1947 from a judge, and he said, Mac, you delivered my first son in 1935. So I'm calling you and giving you and Susie, my grandmother, 24 hours to get out of the state or you're going to get lynched. And that was the head of the Ku Klux Klan. So he
Oh,
packed all his stuff up and ended up in Daytona Beach, Florida, where my mother grew up, met my father at Georgetown, but then my dad, when I was 2 years old, moved back to the Republic of Panama because his father, my grandfather on my father's side, had heart issues. So I grew up in the Republic of Panama. I went to U.S. schools. My mother was a school teacher for 23 years in the Canal Zone.
hmm.
And then my father, we didn't have a very good relationship at first. And he had one rule, and that is that I would never be in the military. Because in Panama, you have the military, you have the church, and you have business. And people join the military are the low income class. And, but because of the stories of my grandfather, I just, and my uncle, was a general in the Air Force, so I wanted to fly airplanes. So I ended up applying to West Point and and the Air Force Academy. I got in, and I went to the Air Force Academy. My father wasn't happy about it, but later I think he was proud of it. Unfortunately, I was a bit of a an idiot because at midnight, lights out, and I would study under the cover with a flashlight. And my eyes went from like 20/20 to 20/100, 2200. And back then you couldn't do LASIK surgery. So I lost my flight status. I had to do something. I
Hmm.
loved all those watching James Bond, and they had 5 Intel slots. So I ended up, because I was fluent in Spanish, I ended up running around El Salvador, Honduras, Colombia. This is 1980s, right? And I was working with CIA people, with Navy SEALs, with the special operator, doing a bunch of crazy stuff back when there was an active guerrilla war. And then started doing things like going after Pablo Escobar and being assigned to Bolivia and stuff like that. I ended up, there was a 4-star general named John Galvin, and he basically took me under his wing. I was only a second lieutenant. And while I was with him, I had this theory that the Cubans were doing a lot to destabilize Latin America, and the U.S. was so focused on Russia, Russia, Russia. So the general got me a 3-month study where I studied all over Latin America. I had amazing sources, and I wrote a classified study that was about 300 pages. He declassified it, gave it to Mort Zuckerman, who was his friend from Boston, and he was the owner of U.S. News and Report magazine. So he
Hmm.
published a cover story called Drugs, Terror, and Politics, The Deadly New Alliance back in May of '87. So I've always been doing investigative journalism, and some top Pulitzer Prize winning journalists took me under their wing that were reporting for Christian Science Monitor, the New York Times, back when you had real journalists in the mid '80s. And then when Zuckerman came down and I actually briefed him, he told me about something called the White House Fellowship. I'm like, what's that? And he said, look, every year, 15, 14 or 15 people get selected from all over the country, and you're assigned to a president, vice president, or a cabinet level secretary for 1 year. And the idea is that hopefully after that experience, in 20 years, you'll come back as, an important position. So he said he'd write me a letter of recommendation. And General Galvin, 4-star general, who goes on to become the NATO Supreme Allied Commander, also writes a recommendation. And then at the age of 27, I become the youngest White House fellow in the history of the program. Colin Powell had been a White House fellow, for example. So now I'm in the seat of power, and I get I wanted to work with Bill Bennett because he was Secretary of Education. My mother was a teacher. I really thought education was the way to go. He hired me, but then in the summer, he ended up leaving to form his own thing with Jack Kemp and Gene Kirkpatrick. So I didn't want to work at education without him. Somebody was already working at state, but John Whitehead had been the chairman of Goldman Sachs, and he retires and he goes to clean up the State Department. So John hires me. Now I'm John's like number two guy. And so from that perch, being a White House fellow, doing that, that just led to working for one administration after another in one capacity or the other. But I was always writing. I drafted, and then I was there during Reagan to Bush, that transition.
Mhm.
So Reagan leaves, and who does he name as the nation's first drug czar? Bill Bennett, who had already hired me. So I became Bill Bennett's second or third hire, and I helped draft the nation's first drug control strategy. So that was, wild. And then after that,
How much, as you're going, just how much of this was just purely organic, meaning like you were just kind of along for the ride, obviously intentional. I don't want to pretend like you were just getting drug around. At what point, if there was one, did you consciously go, okay, like I want to take a vector here and I'm going to leverage this? Or was it always just kind of like one thing led to the next and then you just kind of made decisions at each
it,
point?
it was ups and downs. I got to tell you, Galvin wanted to get the military involved in the war on drugs. The military wanted nothing to do with it. This is 1989.
Yeah.
And he sends me over to the Pentagon to go get all these helicopters. I knew exactly where they were. I told him. And I show up in a suit and tie and I'm sitting down and some three-star general Marine Corps walks in and basically starts screaming at me like, what the fuck are you doing? Who the hell do you think you are? You work for us. You're in the military, blah, 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 blah. And I, saluted, did everything, but I still did what Bennett wanted me to do. And when my White House fellowship was up, Bennett made a by name request to um, Colin Powell, who's chairman of the Joint Chiefs, to stay there. Guess what? Said no, they had an important assignment for me. And I had to report immediately to the Defense Intelligence Agency. So I reported, and this brigadier general says, yep, we got this great assignment for you. You're going to be the analyst for the Nicaraguan Navy. I'm like, the Nicaraguans don't have a Navy. Exactly. So, so then I got out of the military. I'm like, shit, this ain't going to work. So then I went to Columbia Law School. I was the first person in my class to publish on the law review. I won the moot court competition. And
Hmm.
then I said, law's a business. There's a lot better ways than writing down every 6 minutes who you're working for. So I had somehow learned to trade options in law school, and I started making a lot of money, a lot more. And I'm like, okay, I got to work 3,000 hours at a law firm, and I'm going to get paid $70,000 a year. Well, shit, I just made 70,000 last week trading Motorola options. What the hell am I going to go to law school for? So I ended up leaving Columbia, and I had read a book called Market Wizards. I don't know if you've read it by Jack Schwager.
That one I
And
have not read, which is always I always love when I heard that's why I love talking to guys like you, because I always love when I hear a book I've never heard of, and that's one that I've
oh,
never heard of. Yeah.
that is a classic. I think it came out in '87, and there was one guy that had gone to Columbia. His name was Marty Schwartz. He was a Marine in '68. He had won 7 stock trading competitions that Stanford put on, and then he finally just kept, stopped going to them, and he lived in Boca Raton, Florida. So I left New York. I went. Guy wouldn't see me. He had a license plate called Pitbull. He traded S&P futures, and I literally sat in his office for 3 weeks, all day long. And he had a side door that he would escape from. But finally, he saw me and we hit it off and we started a hedge fund called Leatherneck Partners because I had been to Marine Corps Command and Staff College. You like that? But
Yeah.
but what I learned is I'm not a good day trader. I mean, this guy was the most disciplined guy in the world. He was making 6 to 7 million every year. A couple of times he raised 100 million in a fund, but he both times he gave it back because the pressure of managing other people's money.
Yeah.
And I had an office with a guy named Meyer Berman, who was one of the nation's best short uh, players in the world. He took US Surgical from 105 to $8, but he started shorting at 65 and it almost put him out of business. So I did start a hedge fund, but I ended up starting something called the Thrift Value Fund. And we were basically taking positions in banks and thrifts all over the country. And when they would go public, we would take 5%. And I grew that 37% a year for 3, 4 years. And I did it with my ex father in law, who the idea is we would take this track record and then we would raise 300 million and we'd have this amazing hedge fund. But I was making him the majority of the 75 million in there was his money. And I was doubling it every 2 years. So he's like, no, 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 just keep doing this. So then I left and I started a financial services firm. And, I started, what was my background? Research, writing, intelligence. So, and my father was a doctor and I liked the biomedical space. So I ended up bringing on staff about 8 medical doctors. And we, picture 97, 98, 99. Nobody was writing at that time short research because investment banks are looking to write long research and have investment banking clients. So I started making markets and our research, we hit the Wall Street Journal front page twice. We would cover a company and they would, drop 25% from our coverage. But, the big law firms started suing us. You wrote this 90-page report and on page 85, this paragraph, you said this and it violates securities laws. And it was all bullshit. But, they make us spend $2, $3 million. And so things changed in Wall Street in terms of making markets. Used to have, wide spreads of 75 cents. Then it went to decimals. So they killed that business, which was a great business for a while. So I sold my company in 2006 to a public company. We had 8 offices. Well, we had 8 offices overseas and about 52 offices in the United States. And I had that model where I was clearing Bear Stearns. If you were at Merrill Lynch or Lehman or wherever, getting a 50% payout, you would come, I'd give you a 90% payout. You had Bear Stearns as the backbone, but my margins were really, about 30% with all the other things that you get, paid for. So I did that for a while. I sold the company. After I sold the company, um, I started a merchant bank. I started a private, more of a venture fund with some friends of mine, and we started investing. Then I had been involved in YPO and Vistage, which are peer-to-peer
Yep.
groups.
Very
Then
familiar
I
with
did
NYPO.
Tiger 21. You're probably familiar with them. I did that for 8 years, enjoyed it. And then I decided to pivot and I went to Harvard for a year. I taught at MIT for 2 years. And I came up with this concept. Um, I had been involved in a peer-to-peer group of social entrepreneurs, and I became the CEO. We ended up being in 34 countries, 1,000 unbelievable social entrepreneurs, but I could never solve. They sucked at raising money and or having business practices to grow and scale. So I thought, what if we had 1,000 superheroes, 500 in the US, 500 abroad, that had created at least 100 million in wealth, and generosity of spirit was one of their core values, and we wanted to create a force for good in the world. And instead of, making money, let's solve some of the world's most intractable problems. And instead of reinventing the wheel, let's connect with these other social entrepreneurs that need money, capital, intelligence, and help them. So that's what I did in the middle of the pandemic. My wife thought I was nuts. I ended up raising about 15 million from a lot of friends that ended up becoming partners. And we launched, and today we got about 182 members. We The average net worth of our members is 600 million. And since day one, I've been writing something called the Night Owl. We believe wealth is more than money. Our purpose is to architect an oasis for strategic wealth creators and their families to flourish around the 6 forms of capital, which we call fishes. So not only financial capital, but intellectual, social, human, emotional, and spiritual. And we have a full day meeting on those 6 verticals. And then we have 5 other meetings. We have circles. So we have all kind of affinity groups for people that own airplanes or they want to go on adventures. I run something called the Market Opportunities and Risk Circle once a month. About 20 members that made their money in financial services and manage their own money like me get together to talk about what we're doing. And I've made a ton of money following interesting investments. Or someone will say, I just put 5 million in this fund. I think we should invite him to talk to us. I think you guys will like hearing about it. And if there's a consensus, then we'll invite them. We do have, I want to say, about 6 money managers. 3 of them are in the top 100 the Wall Street Journal puts out in terms of AUM. 2 of them are in the top 5. And, they become billionaires from managing, 45, 50 billion RIAs. And then we have about 20 or 30 guys that run hedge funds, private equity, venture capital, a bunch of real estate guys. So I'd say the majority, though, are just entrepreneurs, 80% first time self-made, and 20% are second, third gen. So that's kind of my
So that's a
background.
tremendous that's a tremendous context for which we're gonna listen and interact with the audience and everything over the next, hour and 40 here, but that was a phenomenal intro. Now here's a couple things I wanna do just, to honor the people in the stream. So we're growing, guys, let's punch it. We're at 388. It's been climbing steadily every second that he says a
All
word,
right,
so
I
let's
see a
get
whole
it.
bunch of my guys in here.
Yeah,
Billy
yeah,
Ray,
let's get it.
Stan. I don't know how they found it. I didn't announce it, so you got 30,000 followers, so
Yeah, so we're,
maybe Substack announces it for me.
Maybe, I don't know. You're number 1. I don't know what they do for number 1, I'm just down in the top 100 somewhere
Yeah,
and
you got like
trying to hang on.
30,000 subscribers, man.
So, but here's a couple logistical things, guys. So thank you. First of all, I wanna shout out a couple people. I don't wanna, leave anybody out, but just so you kinda know and get encouraged, like Matt Ross, I see, Buck Thursday, we don't know each other, but I see you've been active. David Martinez, Nicholas made a comment about your resume and how powerful the CV is. I'm not sure who
Dave
MFS is.
Martinez, I've known that guy for a
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah, so MFS, whoever they were, made a comment about it's
MFS,
nice to hear the voice.
those
It's
guys
nice.
are all super fans, super smart guys too.
So, I think here's the thing, guys. Drag a friend to this. Number one, anybody who's ever followed me at all or doesn't know me knows I have a thing called daft to it. Drag a friend to it, right? Just drag a friend to this right now. You're gonna make a better relationship if they hear Charlie's voice and they understand the things we're about to get into in depth. But here's a question that I have for you because I think this is something that I've always wondered, right? And I think it creates an opportunity here. Your resume is ridiculous. Like there's not even a word for your resume. And you say it as if, it's just like, yeah, I grew up in Panama and then, 6 presidents and Harvard and MIT. And then I decided I wanted to do that. And I mean, it's like people are going, what the hell? Like I can't do that right now. Most people on this are not saying that, but even if they were, my point is, how much of that, was just like you just asking or just being like, you know what, I'm going to just try and do that and figure it out. And the reason was because we met because I cold called you. And
Yeah,
I say that because I just want people to understand like the world is like, you don't have to ask permission for any of it. And what's so funny is as I'm listening to you, we didn't know each other at all. I think my first post that I discovered of you was the one about Xi and Trump and their upbringing. And I went, this guy is wicked smart. And I don't remember when that was. Maybe it was a month and a half ago. We'll get into it. But I discovered that and I just went, man, I like this guy. And then I read something more recently, and then I decided for my own reasons, I got to start just doing live streams on Substack. The podcast is great, but like I want to do
Well,
these
we came
live.
up yesterday with the
And
idea
I
of the live
cold
stream, right?
called you. I literally cold called you and said, you want to record a thing? And I'm like, and then you said yes. So you responded in the DMs. And now what I'm finding out is, there's so much commonality, even what you just said about your six forms of wealth. 19 years ago this July, I decided to write a book with my father, who was a teacher coach. He was not an entrepreneur, he was not an investor, but he is I've learned that he was one of the most, profound and wise and humble humans that I could met.
Right.
And so I wanted to write a book with him when I started my journey 19 years ago, of really going into this space. 6 years in my entrepreneurial career, I pivoted in this world and I wrote Wealth Matters, the first book. And the book was about 6 areas of wealth, spiritual, like everything that you talked about, and financial was one of them. And so as I'm listening to you, I'm laughing because there are just no accidents in the world. And so as we go through this, just like listen to Charlie, but my thing is just be bold, like take action. He's an example as I'm listening of just doing things, and then all of a sudden you build this CV and this portfolio that's ridiculous. And
Well, let
yeah.
me get into that because I've thought a lot about this, and I grew up with parents, from a different era, and they never said to me like, "I love you." Okay. My mother was a school teacher, valedictorian. My father never got a B in his academic life. And they were tough. And the only thing, we had to perform.
Mm,
So unfortunately for me, I internalized that in order to get my parents' love, I had to achieve, and once I achieved something, I had to keep achieving and keep and never stop because that's how my parents were going to love me. And
mm,
it created an engine, trauma that I just never stopped. And crazy stuff that I've done, from like Olympic teams, from jumping, representing Panama, crazy things I did in the military, that I can't even talk about. Awards from the CIA, I mean, the head of intelligence, for crazy things I've done. But then I hit like 50, and I realized that everything I was doing because of that. And I asked my kids, I have 4 kids, 3 daughters and a son, and I said, "What have I done well as a father, and what are opportunities to do better with you?" And without exception, they're like, "Hey, Dad, we really admire you. You're out there saving the world. You're on all these boards, blah, blah, blah. But when is the last time we one on one went anywhere together? And for
mm.
that matter, when was the last time we went on a family vacation? You're like living your purpose, doing all these things." So I I said, "Fuck," I took a look at my life and said, what fueled me and has gotten me here is not the person I want to be, going forward. And I'm a man of faith. It's my number one value, even uh, above family. So I really decided, get off all my boards. I
Mhm.
want to. My mother wasn't well, so I moved to spend 2 years with her, and I'm really blessed. She passed away last July, but I was with her every single day. I started focusing, got off all my boards, and started focusing on my kids, my wife, my nieces, my nephews that I didn't have a close relationship to. And I said, for the next 5 years, and I'm 2 years into it now, or two and a half, I'm going to use all my superpowers on my family. But I'm a creator, and I get itchy. And this whole Substack thing started as a fluke, and because I could write 2 or 3 articles for MarketWatch, but the editors, it's like they just couldn't deal with me. And I'm like, huh.
Or you couldn't deal with them. One or the other.
And I still write, like, I sent them an article yesterday that's going to publish today, but it's a whole different um, venue. But the bottom line is that yes, I have a resume that's kind of nuts and crazy, but at the end of the day, what I discovered is that the only thing people are going to remember is how I made them feel and what impact I had in their life. So I actually wrote a eulogy when my mother was alive, and I shared it with her, my wife, and my 4 kids. And I said, "Look, I'm gonna live to 101, and when I die, this is what I want my eulogy to be." And it's, R360 is 1 sentence. All the accomplishments are gone because no one's gonna remember those things. And it ended up being 10 pages, and my kids, my wife, my mom had all kinds of edits. And I read it once a week because I wanna live my eulogy life. I have 3 grandkids, and that's who I wanna be, but I think I found a way with Substack where I can help people. I have readers in 158 countries. I have a pensioner in Canada who makes like 22,000 a year. So, if I can help people with their wealth, their financial wealth. But then I have podcasts that are free on Friday. I have the Mischief Library where I was reviewing 1 book, but now I'm doing 3 books because I have 5,000 hardcover books and another 4,000 on my iPad. So I have close to 10,000 books in my library. So I wanted to help people, and then I wrote a novel, and the first one is out. HarperCollins wants it. I'm trying to decide whether to serialize it like Charles Dickens and do it on Substack, and I can do it in English and Spanish simultaneously, or do I give it to HarperCollins, but it'll take 18 months for it to see the light of day.
I don't think it's a binary thing. I mean, having come from the publishing world, like we talked about a little bit in the green room. I mean, especially now. I mean, I'm experimenting with that with some of the book stuff. I look at the end of the day, HarperCollins is going to buy the asset that they can still sell the most of, which is a physical printed book, right? And when '09, '10 happened, I was in the publishing space right before the
Yeah.
iPad came out, and the whole thesis then was the business model had been broken. We'll talk a lot about business models throughout this and investment cycles and money and all this as we get going, but just as an example for what it's worth, I mean, I
And
don't
what
think
was
it's
that
a choice
and
today.
how was that business model broken?
Well, so if you remember before borders closed,
Yeah.
right? Remember when borders closed? And that for us over 50, we all remember that. Maybe over 40, you remember that. When borders closed, discovery changed, right? So like we used to go into a bookstore, Barnes and Noble, that's where we bought books. Even when Amazon
Yeah.
was in the early days, most
Yeah.
people went to a bookstore, they bought a book, if they bought a book at all, which is a whole other conversation because somewhere around 87% of people after high school never buy more than 1 book a year and read it. And most people never made it past page 19. So that'll come back in a second as it relates to your book, right? It's an artifact more than it is a utility. So the reality is, and where I was going is, the business model was I pay in advance, and I have different tiers, right? I have
Right.
my best-selling authors, which in '09, I remember the CEO of Barnes and Noble telling us, if you were 52,000 units, if you had sold 52,000 units, you were in the top 1% of books ever sold. And most people go, "That's crazy," because they hear about the million unit thing
Yeah, yeah.
and you have the ones that have sold 100 million copies and all that stuff, right? But the reality was in '09, if you had sold 52,000 books, you were a true bestseller in your lifetime. You were 1% of everything Barnes& and Noble had ever carried. And so, um, we hit that point right there where social and blogging and all that stuff was starting to hit scale in the early version of Read Write Web. And so 3.1 million books a day were being published in 2009.
How many?
3.1 million.
That's a lot.
So think about the
Wow.
long tail, right? So if you think about that, when I'm looking at a business and I'm going, there's 3 million books a day. So what's the world need? Not another book, because there's no time to read 3 million books a day, and there's no time to draw attention to them. And the filter was the bookstore, right? So the bookstore was this container of physical
Yeah.
reality where some curation had occurred. So if you walked into the business section in Barnes and Noble, no one really thought, is that any good? They just assumed it
Right.
belongs here
Right.
because it's good, because somebody did the work to discover and curate this thing. Well, as we proliferated read write web and user generated content and social, right? What do? Well, we democratized the ability for you or me to put our great work out there, but we also created a noise level. And so all of a sudden the earnouts went from a publisher losing on 96% of the books they wrote an advance to, even if that advance was 2 to 20 grand. Well, so on the other side, you have the author. So the author is going to give up 85% of the rights to a Harper, to a whoever, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you're going to get a 15% royalty if you're lucky. So you're going to make $1 a book. And the idea was, well, the publisher's going to do all the work. Well, no, what happened was 2009 to 2010, what was happening is they're not writing checks anymore, especially to mid-list authors. So the person who used to be able to get a 40, 50K check and at least, pay some bills and buy the time to write was now getting zero. So they're going to self-publish. Well, self-publishing is like, $500 ebooks all the way up to, somebody who was a legit guy or gal. And so there was no market for that, like, truly thought leader person. But the business
And my experience, Chris, I have 3 books in 15 languages, and every publisher I've worked with, the biggest of the big, they're glorified printers. They do
and
0
that's
marketing because, I'm getting a $200,000 advance, not multi-million. I guess if they got
That's
a
actually a
$1,000,000.
$200,000 advance today is legit money. That means, and so my point is that doesn't go down from here. If you're getting an advance at all, and I'm out of the business for 15 years, so I don't want to pretend like I know exactly what publishers are doing today. I sold that business or shut it down in 2012. So whatever that is, 13 years ago. But we published 48 books for CEOs and thought leaders, very specifically business thought
Right,
leaders,
right.
in a 18-month period. And
A lot of books.
and I wrote Wealth Matters, the second edition. We published that version through that engine because I own the company. So I was like, well, I'm going to do the second edition in 2011. And so I was one of those 48 with my title, but we did 47 other authors. And the reality was we used it as a business card on steroids. And how many times can you give this thing away for free in physical or print or digital form and generate 9 other ways to make money off of the brand? That was the thesis, right? And we co-invested in it and we put it in all forms, from audio to video books to all this stuff that people were experimenting in 2010, because print was never going to be, everyone was just going to read on a screen, right? No one was going to read a book again. Well, obviously that wasn't true. By 2011, 2012, Book Expo America in New York, the entire floor went from half of it being digital publishers and tech and things like that the year before to like a corner, 10, 15% being those businesses that were still around, and Hachette and Harper and whatever having 80% of the floor again, giving out
Oh,
paperback copies of their bestsellers.
so how did you go from that into finance and helping people make money in what you do with,
Well, I kind of have
you
always
have wealth managers, right? Like,
Well, so I've always been in 1999, I got told I went on one interview in 1999 for Merrill. And I was always fascinated by markets. I don't know why. My parents will tell me a story. I don't even remember it, but apparently we went down to Disneyland on a raffle ticket that my grandmother had won when I was 12. My sister was like 8 and a half, and it was around my birthday, and it was October of 1987. You know the date. And we
I
landed
remember,
we
yeah.
landed in the airport and we're at baggage claim. Now, at the time, my dad's a teacher. My mom would have been a gig economist, but that didn't exist back then. So mom was, basically stay-at-home mom and kind of side hustle, cleaned houses, whatever, right? But she was a stay-at-home mom. So we're down in Florida, and all I know is they said that we were at the baggage claim, and apparently, that was happening, right? The crash was happening of 87, and I was glued to the TV. And they were like, we don't even have any money in the markets. We don't understand what this kid, like, why is he looking at the TV? How does he know what the heck's going on? And I don't remember the story, but they tell me that that was the case. So in 99, I was out of grad school. I had 2 degrees. I was working on an MBA. I had a master's degree in exercise science because I wanted to be a strength coach. I played football. I went to college because I wanted to keep playing football, not because I was stupid, but because that was the only thing I knew I wanted to do at 18. And I knew it wasn't going to last. So then I was like, well, then I'll be a coach because I love being around the game. And after a master's degree and a bachelor's in exercise physiology science, I was told I was worth 35 grand a year. Well, in San Diego, you couldn't, in 1998, you couldn't even buy a car and a house. Like, that was you couldn't
So
live.
you pivoted to making money.
Yeah. So I'm like, I think I better learn how to make money because this plan isn't working. So in 99, I'm like, well, I got all this energy, like whatever. And somehow I got or there was something with Merrill Lynch. There was some open house or whatever. So QQQ had literally just launched, if anybody remembers when that launched. Like I think it was 6 months old. So I go interview and he does the whole sell me the pen thing. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I have one suit and I've got these two-toned, like brown and white Doc Martin low tops that look like I'm about to go do something from the 20s, like, dance era, right? But it was the best I had. And I put on my best suit. I'm like 235 pounds. I walk in and basically, long story longer, the guy goes, you're not a Merrill guy. Like, we got to worry about you on the weekends. Are you going to shave? You got 11, you're making, whatever I was making, $18,000 a year working part-time at a bar. And he's like, how are you going to sell people money? And so they told me no. And I was heartbroken, honestly. Like I really, at that time, I really wanted it. And then I just went to grad school and then I started my first company and I lost a $500,000 learning everything I couldn't learn in school. And then I earned it all back. And then, next thing you know, you're an entrepreneur. And this was before that was a thing. This
But
was like,
how did you land in this niche? You got 30,000 subscribers on Substack, and you have a niche that I'd really never heard about until yesterday.
so I think just like I'm curious about how your parallels come together. For me it was always because I had two goals starting out. Um, I came from, fortunately, a family that I truly believed then, and I still believe now, despite all the things you learn as you get older and where there's dysfunction. Right? I came from a truly blessed family. We used to have a saying: "We're rich in love, not in money," and it was true. There was another saying that my father would say all the time, my mom would endorse, which was called bloom where you're planted. So that's why I was asking you, like, as you navigated all these different amazing accomplishments, like, in my world, that was like bloom where you're planted. So if you live in Panama, do that. If you live, so I've lived all over the world too, my family and I, my wife and I, but bloom where you're planted was like ingrained in me. But we were middle class when there was one. So I think there was always this piece of me that the only rich people we knew were my uncles and whatever that were dentists, but they
Right.
never saw their kids. So in my mind, I was like, I need to be rich in love and money because that money thing seems pretty cool. And so that was kind of the one thing that I just at 24, 25, I was lost. I had 2 master's degrees and I'm standing in the ocean crying my eyes out because I'm working at a bar. I'm like, what the hell am I doing? Like I'm so educated and I'm basically bouncing at a bar. Like, what the frick is I'm 25. I should have figured this shit out by now. I should have kids. You do that thing. And so it was all pragmatism. And then, and now, kind of with all that pattern recognition, starting companies, starting exits, failures, everything in between, I've just always come back to the through line that it is the biggest distractor. And money and wealth are two totally different things. And they both matter. They both play a role. And I want to help people too. I want to be useful. So my spiritual walk, my own version of it too, like, has evolved over the years. But for the last 2, not because I turned 50, but like leading into that, it took us 12 years to get more kids after our first one, thank God. And, we finally were blessed enough to have something work and get twins 2.5 years ago. So I've been back in dad mode again, raising young ones. And, I'm still driven. I'm still motivated. I didn't have it as trauma. I had it as like, just, I've been given this base. Like I've got all this, whatever I've got, like I need to make something of it. But I just want to be useful. So I think part of this is like, well, where can I be useful? And when I look at the forces, because again, you've talked about some of your bias, and some of ours are shared, some of ours are new. These forces in play right now, um, you've got convergence of everything technical that's happened over the last 15, 20 years. You have a monetary system in its 113th year that is lasted every other monetary system we've ever had, but people don't really know that, right? So in other words, it's on its way out. Like we're ready for a new cycle, the fourth turning going into the first turning. So you have all these things, and then you have AI, and
Yep.
you have a demographic force that is the biggest transfer of wealth ever at a time where you have populism coming because governments and corruption are at a biggest force ever, and confiscation is the norm, and it's almost celebrated. And so you have all these things, and then you have people that are worth 2 to 30 million with no one to talk to, and you have the advisors who have that trusted relationship that want to serve those people, but who've been able to just throw them in model portfolios for the last 15 years and up and to the right it goes. And I just saw a gap, man. And I'm like you, I'm a creative. So I'm like, how am I can be useful in that gap? Can I help make sense of all this macro crap that Chris nerds out on, the guys like you I learned from? How can I bring that down without dumbing it down to the plumber who built his business for 30 years and wants to pass that down to his kid? No one's going to buy it, but he's got wealth, but he doesn't know where it is, and he's passive, and he doesn't want to
Right.
lose what he's got, or she, doesn't want to lose what she's got. And how do I take that 25-year-old today and give them hope that the future is brighter than ever?
Let
They don't be nihilistic. And so I don't know. That's what gets me out of bed. I haven't figured it out, but these conversations are what I know will genesis a collective of empowerment. So I honor the fact that you have $600 million friends all in a group that they pay a lot of money to be on, and you're publishing at will the same data in real time to people on this platform. And I think it's absolutely what all of us should be figuring out how to do.
well, let me give you my kind of world view synthesis. We kind of discussed a little bit tomorrow, but my core worldview is that the post 1945 international world order, it's not evolving, it's being liquidated deliberately and on a timetable by an American president who spent 38 years, almost 40, telling everybody exactly what he would do. And the people that run money haven't read the memo. The people who move weapons have. I think the 60/40 portfolio is a relic. I talked about it yesterday. Blackstone, they manage, or BlackRock manage 11 trillion. It was designed for a world of institutional stability, predictable inflation, and an American-led global order that really doesn't exist anymore. Geopolitics, it's not background noise, it's a trade, which is why I write about finance and geopolitics. The Trump doctrine, I wrote a whole piece on that, is transactional hegemony, not isolationism. It's not traditional alliance leadership. It's a dominance, monetized, energy, dollars, force. Every relationship has a price. He's going to be with Xi in mid-May. Hard assets are portfolio insurance, not speculation. Gold, silver, Bitcoin,
Mhm.
commodities, huge right now. And they protect against currency debasement, supply chain disruption, sanctions warfare, and geopolitical escalation. Credibility is restored through action, not rhetoric. Obama drew red lines and convened meetings. Trump drew lines and sent bombers. Adversaries recalculate when consequences are real, and that calculation right now is repricing everything. And the last thing I think is pattern recognition across domains is an edge. So combat taught me that people lie when they're scared. The West Wing taught me that people lie when they're comfortable.
Mm.
And Wall Street taught me that people lie when there's money on the table. And the synthesis is that people just lie. And then
That's a powerful statement right there. Those three things. Say that again. Say that again, because that was powerful. I want everybody to get that. That was super powerful.
I just said, look, combat taught me that people lied when they're scared. The West Wing taught me that people lied when they're comfortable. And Wall Street taught me people lie when there's money on the line. So the synthesis is people just lie. And once you accept that, the patterns get uh, easier. So I took a methodology that I learned working in the intelligence community and applied it to markets and doing things that no one does. So when I had my company, I was writing short research because nobody on Wall Street was doing it. And I hired 8 medical doctors who were helping me flesh through biomedical um, information. And then, when 9/11 hit, I remember, this whole anthrax scare. Do you remember the anthrax?
Of course. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
that was a half a mile from my office, and
Mm.
I wrote a paper that this was not some guy. This was a state actor is where this stuff was coming from, and somehow it landed on the desk of a producer for Paula Zahn at CNN. They called me to make sure I wasn't a kook, and the next day she was gonna be in Boca, and they did a 3-minute hit that turned out to be 11 minutes. And after that hit, the phone started ringing. The next thing you know, I'm on Crossfire. Remember that show?
Oh yeah.
And, Tucker Carlson was standing in for somebody else, so he was on the right, I forget who was on the left, and they put me up against the head of terrorism for the CIA, the sitting guy, and we were debating, um, and I did that for a while, for about 3 weeks, and I said, "Okay, no more interviews. This isn't what I do for a living," but that got me a lot of national attention, of a guy that speaks to power and isn't afraid to tell people what the truth is. Um, and I like jumping into things and finding out what's the lie? What are people not, talking about?
And I think
Why is physical crude trading at $32 above the futures price on your screen? And what does that mean? What's the
I want
trade?
to talk
How do you
about the
make money?
lie. Yeah, I want to talk about the lie. Keep that thread with the oil, but I want to talk about the lie this way, which is I think one of the lies is today that everything fits in a neat little box, right? In other words, Trump has a strategy or he doesn't have a strategy. I like his strategy. I hate his strategy. ICE is doing horrible things. ICE is like everybody wants it to fit in one or other box. And the reality is that's not how it works, but the lie is that. So what is your belief or what is through that lie to from your perspective? Is there a grand design to this? Whether it's being executed or not, whether you agree with it or not, is there a grand design to this? And if so, what is it?
Look, I say, the Trump doctrine is what happens when the sucker at the table realizes that he owns the table, the chips, and the casino. And, you know, I think I'm a scientist, an engineer. I think in hypothesis. So what I always do, and what I've done for a very long time, is I'll say, this is my hypothesis. And my hypothesis is based on these assumptions. And if the facts change, my hypothesis
Mhm.
will change. There's so many things that I believed as a kid that have turned out to be totally wrong and false. And if you read Thomas Kuhn, one of my favorite books, he coined the term paradigm shift. And he wrote a book that these super smart guys would come out with a theory. It blew up everything that existed before. But then as they got older, they got conservative and they started defending their theory and keeping the new theories down. And I try not to be that guy. I try to have a hypothesis, and how many times I've been wrong, and lost a ton of money in the market. Shit happens that you can't control. There's black swans. So Chris, I think in hypothesis, this is my
I
hypothesis.
think
These are my
it's a great
assumptions,
yeah.
you know? And I don't, I've worked for Democrats, I've worked for Republicans. I don't, the education system, I see it in my family where you can't have a conversation about Trump or some subject because they're so ingrained. I used to teach this stuff in the military, propaganda. I used to, it was part of insurgencies. And people have been infected, their minds where they can't think straight, and some of this stuff is not complicated, and you just can't be so tied into a position that you're not willing to change. And I got a lot of smart subscribers and I make mistakes all the time. And, just yesterday, somebody, corrected me, and I got people that are bringing me great information, and you just have to be open to looking at everything and then judging if the information is accurate or it isn't.
Yeah, I think the practice of having a hypothesis is a lost art, and it's one that I think everybody in the chat is validating that, one way or shape or other, they're craving it, right? Everyone's tired of tribalism, although we both and all feed it. If we're honest, we all feed it to some degree, even if we're not trying to. we're powerless to the algorithm. That's part of the work I try and figure out with myself and also help others, is just recognizing our powerlessness over the algorithm and over the machinery that underlies this. You talk a lot about machinery, both in the geopolitical world and the power structures. Talk to us a little about where machinery plays a role in forming your hypothesis, and also your game plan, you know, in general, as someone who's trying to see the world as it is and the rules as they are, and then navigate around them effectively.
Yeah, look, I think there's also values, right? So I'm a man of faith,
Mhm.
and and faith is more important to me than even family. So I so so values are important. Integrity. When I was at the Air Force Academy, I was a chairman of the Cadet Honor Committee. There in my year, I took 250 investigations. I personally sent 108 to honor boards, and 60 cadets were kicked out for various infractions of the honor code. That has never happened before or since. So integrity is super important to me. Integrity of thought, integrity of how you live your life. And then, I grew up Catholic, and then I converted to Judaism. And I have a teacher who is in one of the sacred cities of Israel. I got up this morning and this is the first thing I read, the book of Genesis. And I meditate. That's the 72 Hebrew names of God that Moses used to part the Red Sea. And I meditate every day to one of those names. I think I'm here for a reason. Uh, my life purpose is to inspire and connect others to achieve extraordinary things. So, I'm here to contribute and help others achieve their full potential, starting with me, starting with my wife Christina, my 4 kids, my grandkids. So I take that very seriously. And then with R360, I have 182 members whose average net worth is 600 million. And I want them to take their wealth, their family, and their time and solve some of the world's most intractable problems for the benefit of humanity and to heal our planet. And I almost quit writing when my brother died. So my brother's 59 years old, works out, doesn't drink. And after an R360 meeting, I was taking a train back to Orlando to get back to Daytona Beach. And I get a call that my brother, who I'd talked to the day before,
Mm.
had died, and that my 18-year-old nephew came in at like 4:30 in the afternoon and found my brother dead in the living room. So we figured heart attack, stroke, but we ordered an autopsy and we found out a week later that what had actually happened, he was preparing for a trial. He was looking at his iPhone in his living room. He somehow tripped. He went over backwards so he couldn't break his fall, and his head hit a coffee table and it snapped his neck at the age of
Oh my
59.
god.
And a week later, I'm at the National Prayer Breakfast, and a buddy of mine who is a big guy, he's giving the closing night address, said, "Hey, do me a favor. You're going to be at the head table tonight." It was the day before the prayer breakfast where Trump came to talk. There was 8 or 9 other presidents there. I think 4 of them spoke. And he said, "I'm going to sit you at the head table next to a guy who won the Pulitzer Prize or the Nobel Prize for feeding over 100 million people during the pandemic. And but do me a favor. I want you to get up for 5 minutes before he speaks, and I want you to talk about your relationship with Jesus." And then somebody grabbed me, took off. I'm like, "What?" Like, I called my wife, and she's like, "You're not going to do it, right?" I said, "Fuck it, I have to do it." So I sat down and I talked about that, and over the next 24 hours, the message that came to me, and I wrote about this on my Substack, was, "Hey, you have a gift. You can write, And my big, hairy, audacious goal is to bring peace among and between the Abrahamic religions, which is 4 billion people on the planet, by a novel that makes the Da Vinci Code look like a bedtime story where my protagonist is the mysterious founder of Bitcoin. Um, but he was raised by his parents who are in this secret order he doesn't know about in 3 religions. And I have read cover to cover the Quran, I've read the Bible, I've read the Gospels, and there's very few people that could say that. And I know them really well. So, how do you tell a compelling thriller and bring this message across to change the narrative? Because if you go to the Middle East, with everything that's happening today, you walk around and you see that people are living and walking in 2026 being triggered by a 2,000-year-old story.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're seen hugging, like if it's a Muslim and they hug a Jew because they're friends, he'll get stoned to death the next week. It's the craziest stuff. And I have this gift, and the message that I got was, hey, you see how your brother, perfect health, was gone like that? Well, you're here for a reason, so get to it. Because if you're not going to get to it, well, you know. So I think Substack is a part of that. And Substack, it's not only helping people decipher what's going on geopolitically and making money by just saying, hey, this is what I'm doing. But I think also featuring really unbelievable people on a podcast, and also writing about books that have influenced me and that can help people, and creating this really cool community of, I call them mischief makers with a capital M. And I've seen money really screw people up, and people can screw themselves up and their family if they let money become mischief, small m, versus mischief, capital M, which is, how do I use the wealth to make myself a better person, my spouse, my children, my grandchildren, my friends, my extended family, and my church, my state, my country, the world. And that's kind of on the journey that I am. And I just feel like, David, uh, when he was approached and appointed, um, and Samuel said, hey, you got to go do this. And he went out and he did it. And what I like about David is he's the second most person talked about in the Bible after Jesus, and he was a true fuck up. Yes, he did, kill Goliath and all that, and my novel is Satoshi versus Goliath, but he was a fuck up. But he always came back to God's grace, and he was God's favorite because he really honestly sought forgiveness. And I can relate to him because I've fucked up plenty and a lot. And I feel that same, like, David was a warrior, he was a musician, he was a poet, he was a leader. Um, and I think, people are looking at presidents and they want the perfect person. Well, Trump isn't perfect. And, would I invite Trump for dinner? Probably not. But, it's, he's not my type of person. But I appreciate that he's there. Like we're talking about Chi, who lived in a cave from age 15 to 22. Guy lived in a fucking cave. What they did to his mom, his father, he watched his sister hang herself on a shower with a shower curtain. That guy became more redder than red, and he's thinking in 100 years,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah,
And
I think that piece, which everybody can find on Charlie's Substack. So if you haven't read it, you should subscribe today, obviously. But you should also look that one up. That one was the one that put you in my radar, because I just thought it was A, it was a story I hadn't heard anywhere, and B, it really helped you understand the dynamic, right? Of like why this notion of great leaders, I think depending on the picture we have for words, I've always said humans think in pictures, right? A picture's worth 1,000 words. So we've all heard that. But when we hear great, most of us think of like something like Jesus or something that we want to, but great men throughout history have often been brutal men or really damn, but they did things that were great for whatever their benefactors or beneficiaries were, meaning they were notable. And so great depends on who's saying the word and how they think about that word, the picture they see. But you have this time where you have the world influx prior to this, and we had passive leadership. And again, it doesn't matter which side of the aisle that passive leadership came from. We created a vacuum. And now that vacuum is, again, there's a strategy or there's not, whether we agree with it or fully understand it or not. There is execution level stuff happening at a clip that we haven't seen in a long time from that office. And whether all of it's good, bad, or in between isn't the point. The point is it's happening. And when it's happening, everyone else has to react because cause and effect is a scientific thing. Something moves and something else has to move. And so your piece on Xi and Trump and when this thing comes to a head, I think really just crystallized not only what's at stake, but who the players are, like the people holding the pieces. And it gave me a lot of understanding into kind of how to rethink about it as a hypothesis. So I encourage everybody to read that one.
And I think the piece that really, on February 11th, I looked at all the signs and I said, within 30 days, there's going to be a shooting war. Um, I, and I gave the day before the bombings in last summer with B2s, I gave a piece to Market Watch saying, in the next 48 hours, the U.S. is going to bomb Iran, and they didn't publish it. And maybe they're right. Maybe that type of information shouldn't be out there. But I think that, and that's one of the reasons I went to Substack, is I just want to publish what I see. I have open sources. I talk to a lot of people that are all over the place that give me information. And I just think that in a democracy, people have a right to know. All this stuff is open source. So yeah, when Trump says things, they usually do happen. And he's been saying something for 40 years. I've been with Trump, he's been to 6 of our 360 meetings. One day we had an exercise and I was talking about our eulogy, and he walked in and he said, "What is that?" "Oh, it's my eulogy." He says, "Oh, I've been thinking about that." This was before he became president the second time. And he walked out with my eulogy. And so, and I see if you go to people at the Trump golf course and you say, "Hey, like Hispanics," this is a long time ago when he became first president, I said, with all the stuff that Trump is saying about Hispanic being rapists and all this, that's all bullshit. When he sees me, he asks me about me. He knows my wife's name. He knows my kid's name. I'm a fucking gardener here. That is a reflection. So what you see out there, a lot of it is performance. So you see these contrasting, like, well, who is he really? But I do believe that everything that I see, that between the 20th and the 25th, that he's going to try to take Krog Island, unless something else that I don't know about that is not public makes the risk calculus in terms of how many military men and women they're going to lose. But there's a lot of weapon systems that are new that we don't know of. And there's a lot of information I don't have access to because I'm not there. But the calculus that he's making is to do it or not to do it. On the 22nd, the ceasefire ends. He usually moves before that happens, and then the War Powers Act complicates things starting on April 29th. And they've pulled out a lot of assets from the Pacific that need to be there in case something happens with Taiwan and China. And they've pushed resources out of Ukraine. Everything is converging. You don't do that. You got to understand that. And people don't understand this. Like when a president, Obama, Biden, anybody, Bush, is in the Situation Room and you're surrounded by 4-star generals and admirals, and the way that they speak, they're telling you, Mr. President, you cannot do that. If we move blah, 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 this is going to happen with China. China's going to do this. China's going to do this. You're going to start a war with Taiwan, blah, 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 blah. And that's the way they talk. So to have somebody say, I hear you, but that's not what we're going to do. We're going to do what I want to do. And what I want to do is we're going to take this carrier that's been out there record time, and we're going to keep pushing, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. And we have a French carrier, nuclear power, that's in the Eastern Med that we've trained with for 25 years isn't a coincidence. All of these things are happening, and whether he pulls the trigger or not, I think he will. But I can't tell you for sure, but that's what it looks like right now. And I've created certain things that still have to be triggered that we haven't seen yet, but could happen over the next few days. And there's another carrier that's, already cleared the bottom of Africa it could be heading on its own without the slower ships. It's happened before to get into place. But the last time we had 3 American carriers anywhere, Saddam lasted like 72 hours. Now we're going to have 4 carriers with the French carrier. So, and all the countries are involved too. All the Middle Eastern countries.
Yeah, I know people want to know this, and one of the reasons I wanted to unpack this part with you on the back half of this thing, after we really understood, more about you, which you, I think, illuminated in all new ways for us the first 45 minutes, is really get granular. I know you haven't published all of it yet, so we're not going to steal that. They're going to have to subscribe to get that a day before everybody else does. But a lot of people are already following you, and so they have the questions. So this is kind of for them and for those who, or for my audience that didn't know you existed until just now. So I look at it in a layman's terms way, but I really want you to kind of break this down and unpack some of those metrics you're following, because I laugh at a couple things, and it's certainly not because I have the expertise that you have or the vantage point that you've had. I just am gut level going, Trump is more predictable than everybody says he is. Like, all you ever hear is he's unpredictable. It's like, well, no, because 40 years ago he took out an ad and he said he was going to run for president. No, he broadcast what he was going to do. Like, art of the deal, 40 years. Like, everyone talks about, here's what he's doing, leverage. Like, so what is unpredictable about that? And yet somehow he is geniusly able to still remain unpredictable. Right. And whether it's saying something stupid or offensive or doing something that, makes all of his supporters even skin crawl, there's elements of it where I do think it is, again, just my gut level. I just think, whether you agree with it or not, it's just part of his game. It's just how he plays the game. And somehow he keeps everybody on edge. It's shock, fascination, and agreement. He's getting one of those 3, and he's in our subconscious, whether we like it or not. He controls the narrative arc, or he changes it. Period. So none of that to me is unpredictable. The question is, now you're another leader. You're sitting on the other side of that. You're Xi. You got oil issues. You got people in unrest. You got, 16, 18% unemployment below age 25, or you have a lot of pressure yourself. And, but you can think in 100-year cycles, which we can't over here because you don't have midterms coming up in 6 months or whatever, right? So you have these other things that are your levers. And for all those ships to go to the Middle East means we're leaving a back door open, call it Taiwan. And for me, again, pure layman, just like thinking in plain speak, I'm going, that's because somehow the calculus has told somebody in their mind, i.e., the president, that China can't move. If I take this out, China can't do what everyone thinks they're going to do right away. They, their calculus changes. And so the lever to me is, yes, we got to get bad guys out of power after 47 years. Yeah, all those obvious things. But the real lever is, this is about May. This is about the meeting in May. And it always has been. I don't know if I'm right. I'm just saying that's just my that's my hypothesis. And I have been able to prove otherwise, even reading all your stuff. Is that what you think? Or do you think a different version
It
of that?
I think that Trump thinks in 5 dimensions. So, yes, one dimension of 5 is the negotiation with China. I remember being with President Bush I was at his ranch in 2001. It was after 9/11, and I remember asking him, in his view, what was the greatest threat to the United States? And, I'm at his ranch, and it's informal, there was no press there, and I figured that he was gonna say, the war on terror, the Middle East, and he didn't say that, and most people don't give the guy credit. He'd read like 50 books a week, super smart guy, and he said, "The greatest threat to the United States is the geopolitical, military, and economic threat from China, and that the United States only acts when there's a crisis." And
Mhm.
we're talking 2001, 2002 timeframe. And the other thing, if you look at if we stay on Bush, there used to be a guy called Bush's brain,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And that
Remember.
was Karl Rove,
Right.
because he helped him win the presidency. Karl's very smart. They would talk all the time. He was chief of staff. Trump doesn't have that. There is no
You don't think
Trump.
Susie doesn't play that role at all?
No, 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 no. Trump is his own man, and sometimes, quite honestly, like a grandmaster, he doesn't know the decision until he makes it.
I
And
agree with that 100%. I
yeah,
think that's his genius, and that's also what makes him unpredictable is he's not even hiding it. He doesn't
that
know. He's a gut level guy.
there there was when I was a White House fellow, there was a guy named John Gardner who started the program, and he had worked with all the presidents, super bright guy, and I asked him, "What is the number one quality of a leader?" He wrote like 20 leadership books, and he gave me an answer that really surprised me, and he said, "Energy." I'm like, "What?" And he said, "Great leaders, particularly presidents, they have an energy that just dominates everything." Trump doesn't drink, he doesn't sleep that much. He's like the ever ready battery. He has a ton of energy, and he can maintain 4 or 5 things simultaneously, and he also has balls. So, in the first presidency, Xi at Mar-a-Lago, and he has his granddaughter singing to Chi in Chinese, right? He creates this chocolate cake, which he found out was his best, and he had a 3-star Michelin chef make it. And while she's like having his nice dessert one on one with Trump, Trump had gotten up to go to the bathroom, maybe half an hour before, and he leans over and tells Chio, "By the way, because you're going to hear this in a bit, I just decided to bomb Syria, and I thought that you should know." And like, no, like no president that I've worked for, like in that depth, would do stuff like that. But that's his style. And I think that he has made the calculus that Chi wants order, stability. She has done a massive removal and purge of military and political people at the top over the last, call it 18 months. His father was purged by Mao, so he's lived that himself, and he's redder than red. And I don't believe that they are ready or capable to take Taiwan, and that's the calculus that Trump has done. And
Yeah.
I think he wants to show up with 20% of China's oil comes from there, right? And then I wrote a piece about Guyana, where we've let this Canadian company that's owned by China owns 25%. They're getting an additional 10% of their oil is coming from there, which the US could shut off at any time. All their oil comes by sea, right? Now, they control all the rare earth elements that we're going to need for our Tomahawks, our airplanes, everything that is being destroyed right now, and the silver that's been gated, and all these rare earths that you can barely pronounce, we need militarily. And they're being gated right now by China. But guess what? They need our soybeans to eat. They need our chips. So it is a relationship that's super complicated. Trump's been in China for 30 years. He knows how it works. He would apply for all these things, and it was denied, denied, denied until he finally became president. They started awarding him some contracts in China. He knows how the game is played. So I think he wants to go with a win in his pocket. But I mean, talk about the next week, what's going to happen or not happen is huge for the United States of America, and for that negotiation with Xi, and what he does or doesn't do.
Well, and I think all of these levers, right? And again, I'm speaking to you from my um analysis, which is the hypothesis I want broken or validated to some degree for my own investments and for anyone listening. They're everything from Alberta, hearts and minds, whether they secede or not, it's not the point. The 51st state, all of these things that people go, what the frig is he talking about? Like, if you really just zoomed out and you just put all of it aside, said, I don't care who it is, somebody's doing these things. What do these chess pieces have in common? Well, Alberta is a very strategic piece of land between Alaska and here with a lot of things, right?
It
It's
has
just,
it has my largest equity investment, which is
and
CNQ.
yeah. Then you
I
have
love Alberta.
then you
Love
have yeah. So then you have Greenland, and then you have Venezuela, and then you have that. So there's all these different things that I think about, and I go again. What did we demonstrate in Venezuela? One, we demonstrated immense precision right after we just demonstrated immense precision taking out the bunkers in Iran with a 32-hour flight that is unbelievable.
and Trump had a huge ego lift, okay?
Sure.
Huge ego lift that nobody knew. It was a surprise. It was a surprise in Venezuela, and it was a surprise when we hit, even though I wanted to publish my piece and MarketWatch didn't publish it, it was a surprise. And I do think that with the blockade, he's changed the entire narrative. Only 30% believes there's going to be boots on the ground in Prague, and he wants it, needs it to be a surprise if it's going to happen.
And I'm actually surprised that it's a surprise. But again, we live in our own feed. We live in our own again algos, and so some of us listening to this, whether we've read you or not, or whether we've read other things that complement and then bring you into peace, we may not feel surprised. Like, I think there's a 80-90% chance that we do it. I don't understand why we wouldn't do it. And I'm not saying I agree or not. I'm just saying, based on all the other pieces that have been laid out, it's almost like you came this far. You don't want Vietnam. And he's very clearly, again, you go back to 2005. I'll never forget an interview. I can't remember where it was. He was on the
Right.
radio. I was driving. He said something in 2005 when we escalated in Iraq. And I think it was when it was going bad. It was going the wrong direction. It was before we kind of had that surge again. And they
Right.
interviewed him. Somebody interviewed him and said, what would you do? And he goes, it's real simple. I pull out, I declare victory, and I throw a big freaking parade in New York City. And he literally said that on camera. And I'm like, that's what he would do here. So in other words, no matter how this shapes out, we're going to win
Right.
Iran in his narrative arc. Now, if he's going to do that, if we don't win or we don't get all the pieces we want, but he's got the
Right.
lever, got the momentum, why do you think he's not going to do everything he can to get a real win? He's already had two.
And, and more than that, he's like a magician who shows you one hand so you're not looking at the other hand.
Right.
And everything is a blockade. And now I have really smart people in R360 that are, it's all about the blockade. The blockade works just as well. And everybody now, the narrative. And Trump is a genius at keeping the narrative and the press aimed at where he wants it. I mean, think about his
Mhm.
arc, his career, his TV career, how the media is always focused on him. But then you have to look at cost. Okay, the aircraft carriers and a full strike group. What's the daily cost of maintaining,
No idea.
them? What's the cost of a blockade? And does the blockade actually get you what you want? There's no possible way that we can maintain a blockade for a period of time, and people there's a clock, April 29th with war powers. So, and we haven't if he had found the 400 kilograms of enriched uranium, that's the big threat. He'd already be telling everyone. So the Mossad might have and might know where it is. And I think that part of the mission, even with Krog, is you're going to have Delta units that are simultaneously maybe working with Israel, going after the enriched uranium if we know where it is. The problem is it has to be an intel win because you could put that in the back seat of a pickup truck and it's a country as big as Alaska. But if we know where it is, and we might, then there's a wargaming operation that would be executed during the same time. And if you look at the rescue of the pilot, it makes no sense, none, what they did and how many weapons and aircraft were involved. There had to be something else going on at the same time. It just doesn't make any sense. So, and being so close to where the enriched uranium is, there was something else going on at the same time. So, I do think those are the two big operations, and the whole concept of a dimmer switch. I grew up in Panama. The Panama Canal. It was a lease of land, like Guantanamo in Cuba. It's a lease. So I think that when you look at the power structure and who's really in charge, and the fact that the Iranian army has zero incentive for peace at all, um, the only leverage is to cut them off. And I grew up in Panama where you had Noriega, who was like Don Corleone from the mafia.
Right.
He was a businessman. And the reason he didn't leave is because so many people under him in the military, they own all the businesses and infrastructure. And the army in Iran is everywhere. They control all of the businesses, the banks, the insurance companies. Um, there needs to be a grand bargain where it's not regime change. They stay, and the Israelis say they're going to stay, but they're not going to do what they've been doing for the last, nearly 50 years, death to America, death to Israel, and supporting Hezbollah and Hamas and everybody else. So the grand bargain will be, also has to be that we could double the profits coming to Iran, um, with a lot of things that we could do in terms of the oil coming out of there if they have a good relationship with the Middle East and the US, and they're not, blowing everything up. And if we could pull that off, we shall see, because China is a big player in all of that, and they have a ton of influence, a lot more influence than we do.
Yeah, so what I loved about your piece that started our relationship of discovering you before we spoke 2 days ago and decided to do this yesterday, which is all organic, was, you framed it as the art of the deal runs right into the art of war, right? And I think it's anyone who's read either one of those books or hasn't, you got to read those, really have the right context for the dynamics that are really driving whatever happens next in the geopolitical world. Then obviously we can talk about what are those second order impacts on capital markets, resources, energy flows, monetary flows, because that's what we're all trying to net out some good decisions on the practical side of what this means for all of us and our advisors today. So we'll get there, guys. I promise. This is important contextual background that you don't get reading a headline or reading 3,000 words. Um, art of the deal, art of the war. Let's talk about, again, removing proxies, right? So to me, how I've, again, layman's turned it into simple math for myself to make sense of. I go, okay, Venezuela is a proxy, and they're doing bad things in America and trying to get a bunch of oil there, and there's like all this, so we got to take that out. And there's other reasons to take that out, but that's the real. We have to take a leg out of that stool for Xi. Then okay, Iran's a proxy. We already know that, right?
Well, you got Cuba, which
Well,
is
we got to
coming
do
next.
Cuba next, right? But we got to take Iran out, and so we got to do that because again, that removes another leg for Xi to stand on, and we have to take out the cartels in Mexico, not just because thousands of people are dying every day because of bad things that we've let into the country, because children are being, harvested, like all the obvious, like all that. Yes, that needs to end. But the other strategic component in my simple head is it's a leg. We got to take that leg of the stool away, because if she's sitting there bouncing on one leg, right, then I can actually negotiate with him. And until that, this guy grew up in a cave and there's no freaking way he's negotiating with me.
Yeah, and he has to be careful, himself,
Mhm.
and his own power within China, and he's very secure right now, but things, move very, 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 very quickly. Uh,
Marsha Conley has a question I think is timely in this. Where does Lebanon and Israel and their 10-day ceasefire play into this? Have you had a chance to figure that equation out in your mind? And is that something you're going to be writing about anytime in the next day or two?
I'm more focused on the US. Israel is there's an existential threat that, I've spent a lot of time in Israel, and they have neighbors that don't want them to be there, and they need to eliminate that threat. When kindergartens nurse in Gaza have coloring books, I've seen them, which basically starts the propaganda of the mind of why you need to become a suicide bomber for the best for your country, and go into Israel and kill all these people. They're trying to eliminate that threat, and they're going to do everything in their best interest. And when you think of Israel, you have to think of, if you were in charge and you have that history since 1947, what would you do given what's going on right now? Given that Iran, who is the who funds all the proxies, is now on its knees, what would you be doing? And you'd have to look at every single war that they've been through and what has happened in terms of the territories during that time. But what blows me away about Israel is that when you're on helicopters and you fly over the entire country and you see um, all these mosques, and you're going like, what are all these like mosques? The first time I went, and they're like, Charlie, 23% of Israel is Arab, and and there's mosques and there's people that live here in peace and women go to school and women are doctors. And yes, they don't, they're citizens of Israel and maybe they don't get treated the same as everybody else. And there's discrimination and all that, but there's peace and prosperity. And I've been to those towns. I have friends in those towns. So why can't the rest of the Arabs in the Middle East live in peace with Israel? Well, they can. They can if they didn't have all these proxies whose charters says that their whole mission in life is the destruction of the state of Israel. So Israel's going to do what Israel is going to do. And I'm not as focused on that. I'm more focused on what is Israel going to do to support um, if the president moves between the 20th or between now and the 25th, what's Israel's role going to be in the operation? So I'm more focused on that.
Your comment, I think it was yesterday on your YouTube channel. I can't recall now, but I thought your comment and your data, right, facts around what was happening in, I think it was Gloucester or somewhere UK, where we have the B2s, we have everything staged, right, as a signal. In other words, like what's being said on one side is, yeah, we're sitting this out, but then at the same time you're providing that. Whereas Spain very clearly was like, you're not landing here, you're not refueling here, like they made a choice. So you have these countries, whether it's France putting the De Gaulle in the ocean as a fourth player,
Yep.
or the UK allowing us to be 3,000 miles away with a fleet of bombers. All of these things lead to CARG, and whether that shapes out or not, whether it's 50-50 or not, it's not my question. My question is, give us the impact of both outcomes. In other words, what happens in our portfolio? What happens in markets? What happens to prices? And then what is short term, long term, medium term? How do you play it? How do you protect against it? What are the scenarios that you need to hedge for, even if you don't know what hedging is? You're just a person with, with hope, with a retirement, hoping that your advisor knows what the hell to do. Like, how do you start to get practical about some of this stuff so that we're not just mentally, minutiating on this?
Yeah, and this is where I have to be careful because I don't like, I'm a very sophisticated investor. I've run hedge funds, I've licenses for options, derivatives, futures. So I can do a lot of things that most people can't,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is why I'm taking more, I'm a contrarian value investor focused on yield.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm an asymmetric trader where every once in a while I'll see a trade where I'm willing to bet a dollar to make 10. And if I lose a dollar, it's okay. And sometimes it's not 10, you're making 20 or 30 for every dollar that you invest. So I've tried to look at long-term trends and try to help readers like where you should be.
Yeah.
So
And
one of the
I like that too. So in other words, none of this is financial advice, guys. I think we know that, but disclaimer. Like, we're not giving you financial advice. We're giving you things to think about, test your own hypothesis, or maybe form one if you haven't. And I think yield is a good play, like a long term. Like, where do we go 3 to 5? Where do we go 5 to 10? With all these forces, geopolitical being one that's playing out, a new world order being one that's playing out in real time. And what does
and
it impact on yield or fixed income, or just the longer term uh, recovery opportunity, and also potential volatility
I
in the passive?
yeah. And again, I used to run a hedge fund, so I would think in trades.
Right.
What could I buy this morning that I can exit in the afternoon and make money? I'm not, my Substack's not about that. It's really long-term generational wealth. So
Right.
the obvious place, if you look at Buffett, he's sitting on almost 400 billion in cash. It's a lot of cash. That means that in his mind, and he's still the chairman, you either have pedal to the metal or you have the brakes on or you kind of in neutral. And he's kind of in neutral, and he's been that way for a while. And the reason is because the market's overvalued. We hit like over 7,000. And it's because you have all these algorithms and machines that just buy, and
Yeah.
they're not looking at the fundamentals. But 25% of Berkshire is in energy, which is an obvious place to be. It used
Mhm.
to be 16% of the S&P. It went down to like 2.5, maybe now it's 3.5. because of the climate change religion and all of that. And I don't care about that. I want to make money. So being in Chevron, being in CNQ, being in Exxon, these are companies that are going to generate cash for a very long time. I've written about certain books of people that have looked at 50 years of classified information, and they see that when oil gets repriced from $3 a barrel to 12, that's a huge jump, and it stays at that level for a very long period of time. And I think that that's what is happening now. And there's people that think now oil is going to be back down in the 30s and it's just a up and a down. I think it's getting repriced, and I think that the world needs oil, so you want to have exposure to the energy sector, and there's also Shinari as well. So you want to look at natural gas, very, very important. So, and then you want to look at defense. I mean, Trump got the Europeans to now spend up to 5% of their GDP in defense. And there's great companies. And with the dollar going down, it's actually better not to be in US companies. So being in a Canadian company, or I've talked about Rolls Royce, which is an amazing company that makes a lot of the engines, the tanks, and a lot of other things. I'm looking at, it's all about drones now. So there's a lot of different companies, and then commodities. 60/40 is over because everything's going in the same place. So looking at commodities, agriculture, looking at copper, silver. I've been long silver forever. Um, and gold. I have big positions in gold and silver and the miners. Bitcoin. I have a hypothesis that in 20 years, Bitcoin will be 10 to $20 million a coin, probably closer to 20 million. So it's the only asset that's grown 60% a year. And even if it grows 30% a year from where it is today, it's going to be 18, 19, 20 million a coin. It is my largest um, allocation, not intentional. It's just I got in early and it just has grown. I run my own Bitcoin node. So I believe that, and I'm a believer that you want gold, you want silver, you want Bitcoin. I don't own
So
any other
let's
any other
let's dive into that
cryptocurrency.
a little bit. Let's dive into that a little bit because I don't know if it's out yet or if it's another one that you're putting out. But I know that you have a book called Satoshi versus Goliath, right?
My
And so
debut novel, yes.
yeah, and so one of the things that I wanted to talk about because anyone who's followed me, Wealth Matters, whatever, knows for the better part of the last 12 years, I've had a very long term, very bullish, inevitable Bitcoin thesis, and without it being speculative, meaning I don't look at price. My thesis for the layperson is when you have 21 million of a
Math.
thing,
It's math.
and
Yeah.
there's never going to be a way for a human to recreate the
And
the
they've already
network
and
effects.
they've lost 4 million, so it's actually
Right.
17. It gets better.
Yeah, yeah. And then when you have this 10-minute a day, every 24/7 kind of distribution thing that is merit-based and decentralized, when you have something like that and it doesn't get killed the first 15 times the market tried to kill it, then one of two things happens and your thesis becomes one Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin. That's the actual price. Is there's one of one,
But
one of 21 million. And if I could control and own in a sovereign way, self custody, a whole coin, then if it doesn't go to zero, right, it does not stay here,
but
and it does not stay
but Chris,
present.
I like to tell people because I don't want to confuse you can buy the Satoshis. It divides into a million different units, so you could take $5
Right.
since day one of R360. I allow all of my employees to take all of their salary or a portion of it in Bitcoin. And the best way to own it is buy
Dollar cost
$5 every
average.
2 weeks, buy
Right.
100 every 2 weeks, buy 1,000 every 2 weeks, and just always be uh, buying because if it's growing, just go to ChatGPT and put what is $100 or $20 compounded at 30% for 20 years become, and find me a better investment that's going to be able to do that. When you do, let me know because I haven't found it yet.
Yeah.
So whatever you can save, and I tell all my friends that are skeptical, can you lose 1% of your assets? Yeah, I can. So that's how I got into it.
Well, and
Somebody called
there's
me in
1%.
2014
Yeah, and
and said the
I've
same
had
thing.
I have friends that are far wealthier than I am, richer than I am, and I say, listen, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but we've been talking about this. The reality is if you had 1% to 5% of your portfolio evaporate tomorrow, would you lose any sleep? Most people are like, well, I wouldn't like it, but I wouldn't lose sleep. Great. If 1 to 5% of you returned 100% of your portfolio, would you be happy for your kids? And the answer is yes. And if that was in money that you could take anywhere with you without anyone else's permission, would that even be more valuable? Because you don't know what,
Exactly.
right? And it's permissionless. And I think again, this is not me selling anybody Bitcoin or whatever. You have your thesis, I have mine. I think what we're aligning on is that we both have a thesis. Has your thesis changed at all in the sense of the FUD, the technology, the quantum, cryptography, the core debate, like there's a lot of things floating around in that ether. Does it change your hypothesis at all?
No, no, no. They're already making the changes, and in the next 3 years, I'm sure that they will implement the changes that they need to implement. And it's only not only Bitcoin; it's every bank, the military,
Right.
everybody is thinking about and has to do those things. But you definitely want to be in hard assets, and you know, um, when an $11 trillion manager of assets says 60/40 is dead, you should listen to them. And the other thing is the dollar's going down for a reason. If you look at the last 20 years, the debasement is about 7% a year. It's not just inflation, it's how many dollars are being spent and what your purchasing power actually is. And understanding that the CPI inflation stuff the government puts out is totally fake. They've been, they change it all the time. But if, they don't include things like, energy and food I mean, money is being debased. And being in the dollar is not really where you wanna be right now. It's not, helping you. So you need to find something that is growing more than 7%, that is, safe. So and volatility is not a bug, it's a feature.
Yeah.
Look, it's just
And
an
let's
asset.
explain that. Let's explain that in practical terms. What volatility being a feature, not a bug, is everybody talks about that doesn't have a chance to really understand or spend 1,000 hours looking at the thing. Um, Goes, oh my god, but it's so volatile. It was worth 126,000, 2 months, 3 months after the election. Now it's back down to 70, but it hits 60, and it just always up and down. I can't be in that. And it's like, well, the lie is that you think your dollar's worth $1, but everybody knows that $6 gasoline is eating more of your wallet and your disposable income than $4 gasoline. And we don't think about it because we look at a 20 or $100 on a piece of paper and we think that it's real. It's all fugazi. So the reality is that if you can think about it in uh, absolute terms, 21 million is all there's ever going to be, and 19 and a half of them or whatever it is today have already been minted and they're held in somebody's wallet. And there's more people with a wallet with a whole coin than there are anything else. So there's no centralized control. And no matter how many sailor buys or whatever, it's still going to be a fraction. The thing that I remember having my hypothesis really hit a different tier was, I think it was 2017, maybe it was 2018. I can't recall,
Mhm.
but it was somewhere sitting in the $9,000 range. It had pulled back from the all time high. So it was like back in the 8,900 before it went to 3,500 and then back. It was in that range. And I remember listening to a YouTube channel and there was a pensioner, some pension fund manager. I can't recall who it was. Big name though. And he said, I'm not interested. And the guy was asking, well, why aren't you interested? He said, well, when it gets to 55,000, we might take a peek at it. We might start following it because at 55,000, it hits the $1 trillion asset class mark for those doing the simple math, right? So when it hits $1 trillion in that in total market cap, we might start watching it. And then he didn't say if, he said, when it hits 250, we should probably start to own some. And I remember thinking, here it was the day I was listening to this.
Right.
I remember thinking it's at 8,900, 9,000. And what that gentleman just said, who manages trillions of dollars of other people's money, is when it hits 55, we'll look. When it hits 250, we'll start to buy. And then I went, he's not the only one. So my simple mind went, if this guy thinks it doesn't go to zero, and he might, but he also said when it hits 250, we'll start to buy some. He doesn't understand yet. There's not enough to buy. You don't get to just go place an order for 2% of $1 trillion pension fund and have it delivered
Yeah,
without
like
moving.
when the United States starts creating a strategic uh, Bitcoin reserve fund, I mean, it's the ship has sailed. It used to take 100 hours to get smart on Bitcoin, but you could watch 10 hours of videos on YouTube and read a couple of books and get it. It is all math, but there's game theory. I'm still in the 4-year cycle where now we're hitting the down cycle for the next 2 years. I'm still in that camp, but the minute a central bank really starts buying and accumulating, then we're going to get out of that 4-year cycle. But look, my kids have it, my grandkids have it. I know they're going to be very happy when they're in their 40s and they understood what compounding is. But look, I just think it's one asset that you need to be
Yeah.
in.
So
And
let's talk about some other ones that you mentioned, but commodities specifically. So one of the other things we're not talking about with Strait of Hormuz or Carg or all this stuff. We talk about oil, right? Which you can go deeper on that piece you wrote about oil's arbitrage, right? Is the futures price is not the actual price on the ship. I think that might be interesting for those who read that or who didn't know about it. But I also want you to talk about, pesticides and, things that help us plant food and where we land with hunger 3 months after the war ends or 6 months, because those are things that I know you've kind of touched on. Other people are talking about them, but I really would love to hear your lens on that stuff because these are other major impacts, so many of which will be negative. Water. Um, and yet there are also opportunities to play the long game and basically buy the dip or buy a potential uplift of exponential returns on simple stuff that's physical and real, arbitraging bits and atoms, as I like to say. So talk to us about, what commodities you think are mispriced or that are going to be repriced in an aggressive way, and some of the other stuff that you're looking at as it relates to Iran specifically.
yeah, look, you need uranium in your portfolio. It's more of a long-term play. You need I think I'm going to write a big piece as to what's going on with forget about oil, but all the chemicals and the supply chain around the chemicals. It's complicated, but you have to know what urea is. You have to understand nitrogen. You have to understand um, a lot of different chemicals and how th- decisions now, benzene, urea, ethylene, how it affects planting, fertilizer, how it affects everybody globally. So I've talked about some companies that you want to own to my paid subscribers, um, and some commodities, and then also some companies that are the dominant player for agriculture. American companies that have been around forever that are going to do very, very well going forward. I'm also starting to look um, at other countries that are commodity heavy that you could invest in. A lot of them are up already, but I think it's going to be a longer play. And then, what are some interesting things to do with cash? I think that there are some plays I'm personally investing in now that strategy has created. I know Michael Saylor. I've been to his house. I've sat next to him having these arguments about quantum and so forth. I've been on his yacht. He's a rocket scientist from MIT, and people poo-poo him, they don't like him, whatever, but he's created some very sophisticated products where you can get an 11.5% return on your cash, and it's not taxed, it's a return of capital. So you're actually making like 16% on your cash. I love plays like that. I have a friend that manages my cash too, he invests in short-term real estate that I make close to 10% and it's taxed as a REIT. So it's 29.6. I like that. And I can basically call and move my cash anytime. It's a product that's only available to certain types of people. But what he's done with the product stretch, and it's a preferred perpetual, I like. And because I like Bitcoin, the problem with Bitcoin is there's no dividend. It's like gold, right? But if you could exchange your cash and get the equivalent because of the tax rate of getting 14, 15% on your cash, that's a good exchange for the cash that you're going to have. If you're keeping 10 or 20% in cash, particularly if it's and you know and Bitcoin went off its highs, so it went pretty low, and yet the perpetual continued to work. So that's something that may not be good for everyone, but I think I'm going to do it, and I think other people should look at it. But if you have a 60-40 portfolio, you need to be sitting down with your financial advisor and saying, "Hey, here's what BlackRock just published. And these are the reasons 60-40 doesn't work anymore. What should I be doing with my assets?" And it's somebody that needs to know you well because everybody wants advice. I'm like, look, I'm not a financial advisor. I used to be in that business. There's 50 questions that I would ask before making any recommendations, and a lot beyond, your risk, how old you are, and all of those other things. I don't know you. I don't know your spouse. I don't know your family situation. I don't know if you're going to inherit money. So I can only tell people what I'm doing, but what I'm doing isn't necessarily good for you.
I think what you just touched on
And
is
by
what.
the way, I have a hard stop in 3 minutes, so I
Yeah.
apologize for that.
No, no, no. I think I want you to finish with this. What is the practical advice of how you would open that conversation with your advisor or the other way around that you have for people? What are a couple of questions they would ask to even understand if they're in a 60-40 portfolio? Maybe they don't even know what that means. Um, or maybe they haven't checked in a while, right? And so what's like the most proactive thing you could do? Obviously, everybody should subscribe to the thing and get the ammo for the conversations that they want to have. But what's your final thoughts
I
there? And then we
Look,
can't think.
I've interviewed two great guys on my podcast, which appears Friday. It's free. Go to the archive. One is Will Finnerty. He taught at Georgetown for 17 years. He's one of the top UBS advisors. And a younger guy named James Bogart, who specializes in 401ks. Fascinating interviews. One of the things that you should do is ask them to see their own portfolio, their own asset allocation. And if they're not willing to show it to you, that's a problem. Because why should you invest with someone that isn't doing really well with their own money? I would get at least two, if not three, referrals of people that have been with them for at least 5 years. They can tell you how they done with and different types of profile. So you want to check their references. You want to see what they're doing with their own money, and you want to get a general idea of what their training is, their thought process. You could also go, there's CFAs, which are professionals. You have CFPs. A lot of people manage money on a fixed rate, which is, I think, the better way to go. Like, hey, let's work out how much do you want me to pay you a year for doing this for me? And if you want to bill me quarterly, fine. I would work out something like that. There's hundreds of thousands, literally, of financial advisors, and you need to find a good one. And you want to shop with them like you were searching for a heart surgeon because you have
Right.
surgery. You know.
Yeah, Charlie, I know you want to go and respect your time because you've been so generous with it with this conversation. For the 838 people that have climbed into this live stream, every minute that we've been doing it for the last 2 hours, I want to thank you for your attention. I want to thank you for your support of Charlie and for Wealth Matters subscribers. I want to thank you for that. Go subscribe to Charlie's stuff. If you didn't know him, now you know. If you did know him, now you know why to upgrade to the $2 a day or whatever it is that you're charging. That is priceless information and access. And we'll have to, do this
And
again. So,
we'll do it again. And we'll talk about helium. We'll talk about all kinds of interesting thing that's not hot air. And
and
now
we'll
that we've
see.
done it
We'll see
once,
if you're
we'll do it
right.
again.
We'll see what happens in the next 4 to 5 days here with Carg Island. So we'll see if you were right again.
We shall see. There's only one person that knows what's going to happen, and that's Donald J. Trump. And he may not know until the last moment when he pulls the trigger, but I don't know, moving that much military hardware is huge decision with a lot of risk, a lot of money, a lot of wear and tear in the equipment. And I just don't think you do it for leverage in a negotiation when you're negotiating with people who have no incentive, zero, to they've already told you 100 times they're not giving up their nuclear ambition, period, in a story. And you got to repay us for everything you've broken.
Yeah.
That's what's happening.
You're doing it because you're negotiating with someone or something else, and we'll leave it there. You've been with the Atomic Level. This is our first live stream with the
Thank
number
you.
one Substack author right now in finance, Charlie Garcia. Thanks for tuning in, Charlie. Thanks. God
Thank you,
bless.
Chris. Appreciate it. See you, brother.